Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey gang, welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. It's Mark and Phil back again to talk investing, finance, and retirement. I really should start saying Phil and Mark. It's your show. I'm the host, but I don't know. It must be alphabetical.
It's the way, there you go. Just the way it
flows
rolls off the tongue, you know?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. We're going to talk about money mistakes. And hopefully ways to avoid some of those, because we're all going to make them. I think I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, learn from the mistakes of others because you won't live long enough to make them all yourself.
That's right. That's right. And it's not as costly if you let somebody else make the mistake and you learn from that. So
yeah, which is a pretty good quote, really, when you think about it.
It is.
So I got a couple, Phil, I want to go through, right? Sure. You doing all right, by the way?
I'm doing good.
Doing good this week?
Doing good,
yeah. Inching our way closer to Halloween. So
it's crazy.
Halloweeny time.
Once that hits, it's like the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, boom, and then before you know it, we're on to the new year. So it's just nuts.
I know. Crazy. I got a few I want to go through on some of these money mistakes. And these are things where, people, again, they've made this mistake and they're like, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that. So, oftentimes when we're doing stuff on the podcast, it's we'll take email questions or we do scenarios or various different things that we're talking about. Because if it's happening to one person, it's probably happening to other people as well, right? Especially financially. So there's a lot of things where we kind of step in the muck and wish we wouldn't have, right? So let's start with one that maybe doesn't get used a lot or talked about a lot, but I know that anytime I talk to an advisor, they almost always uniformly say this is the last option they would ever recommend to someone if they need to access money for a reason, and that's premature IRA withdrawals. Yep. Like, let's find another way to do this other than this. Why is that?
I mean, it's the downside of taking money from an IRA just in general is, number one, it's taxable, right? So, I mean, so especially if you're continuing to work, so you always have to kind of map out your tax scenario. If you're working and you take money out of an IRA, well, that's extra income on top of what you've already earned. So if you think of how the tax brackets work, right, it just gets stacked on top, so it might push you into another bracket. So, I mean, that's taking money from an IRA from that aspect is bad enough. But then kind of a double-edged sword in this is if you're under age 59 and a half, the IRS doesn't want you to do this. This is meant for retirement. So their way of discouraging it is there's a 10% penalty on top of that. So I mean, if you're in the 22% bracket, well, your tax rate effectively and penalty on that distribution is 32%. So you're losing a third of the money.
Yeah.
So
and you're losing growth potential. So it's
gone, right? You can't put that money back. So it's
really kind of a triple whammy.
There's very limited ways that it can go back, very strict timelines, but in general, it's something, to your point, very, very last resort of where you would want to go to try to get that money.
So, and if you're sitting there going, well, I've got to have, there's something's come up, an emergency. And this, honestly, Phil, this is the reason why an emergency fund is important. We've talked about it. We've done 200 plus podcasts, and it's one reason we talk about it often. If you had the emergency fund, you might not have done this, right?
So plan for that emergency somewhere, whether it's an emergency fund, whether that's having a home equity line available. I mean, it's a great option to have because then if something comes up,
rates are higher right now, but
who cares?
Still.
If you're not using it, then, and even if rates are higher, okay, so I'm having to pay a 8 or even let's say 9% interest rate on a home equity loan. Well, 9% compared to 33% or 32%. It's,
right.
Still a whole lot cheaper.
Interesting. Well, look at there, doing math.
So having some kind of an option kind of pre-thought out before you get yourself backed into a corner where, hey, whatever it is, the roof's leaking, I've got to replace it. I don't have the money and I've got to have the money in the next 2 weeks. Well, not a real good option to have, but.
So that's the mistake. The how to avoid it is get an emergency fund.
Right. Get an emergency fund or have a plan for that, whether that's an actual fund in the bank or some investment or having a line of credit or something available that at least buys you time. So you're not getting backed into the corner that, okay, I've got the money now. How do I get it paid for?
Gotcha. All right. Let's do number two. Number two is lifestyle creep. And so if you've ever worked on a project or anything, there's always something, builders and folks, contractors, they know there's something called scope creep. And the scope of the project continues to grow. Well, lifestyle creep is kind of similar, but like if you think about the fact that, so for myself, for example, Phil, I'm 52. The kid's been out of the house for a couple of years now, a number of years. My wife and I are, in our peak earning years, right? All those things we've talked about before. And so, you say, I'm going to get this, or I'm going to do that for myself, or I'm going to treat myself with this, or even the little things. Like the other day, I was sitting there going, how many streaming services do I need? Right. So, but because
look at your credit card bill, all the subscription fees,
but because you're making more, you're kind of like, well, it's only 14. It's only another $14.99 a month. I want to kind of check this out, or whatever the case is. Right. Well, it starts to creep up on you, and somewhere down the street is the older version of you waving and going, oh, don't spend all my money before I'm old, right?
That's right. Yeah. Don't forget your future self,
right,
when you're in those peak earning years.
Yeah.
So as your earnings have grown, you can enjoy some of that for sure.
You worked hard.
There's no,
a little treat.
You worked hard to get there, but don't spend it all and think, well, I'm putting in my 10,000 a year into the IRA or whatever it is. If you're increasing your income, start increasing that savings, because the reality is this. Yeah, you're increasing your lifestyle today. You're getting accustomed to that. So what does retirement now look like? I mean, if you're accustomed to this higher level of lifestyle now, then retirement's going to be much more expensive. So you better have much more saved to plan for that. So
think about it like our waistline, Phil, right? So we're, if we're in our 50s, you go, I really want to make some brownies. I'm going to have some brownies. And it's like, okay, well, just have one, don't have 2 or 3 like you might have done when you were younger or something like that, right?
The first cookie's good. And that was great. I'm having another, I still got some milk left, so I better have the third one now.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So think of it the same way, right? We don't want to expand too much in that regard. Well, we don't want to, spend too much from our future self. Not that the treat's bad, right? Not that the cookie's bad. Have a cookie once in a while, right? Just don't have, 4 or 5 cookies per se.
It's like everything in life. There's a balance, right? I mean, I've seen people go too much the other direction too, where it's like, no, we're going to, not increase lifestyle at all. We're going to save, which there's nothing wrong with that either. Maybe in doing that, it gives you more options, because now you can maybe retire early because you've accumulated more.
That's very true.
But the flip side is probably the worst type scenario, where you're spending too much and you lifestyle all of a sudden changes 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Maybe the job changes, whatever it is, and now you don't have that income and lifestyle. And
well, I think balance is definitely going to be the key to most of these. So let's go to the third one, because balance certainly fits for this one as well. And that is paying too much for your kids' tuition and then sacrificing your retirement, because you can't finance retirement, right? Yeah. So, and I get it. Look, we all want to help our kids and stuff, but you have got to, like, for the folks that are like, anything and everything to make my kid's life easier, that's fine to a point. But there comes a time in life where you have to realize, think about it like this. Like if your kid was at home, at 19, 20, 22, 23 years old, and you're like, dang, they need to get out of my house and get off my couch. Well, you're going to be on their couch, 20 years later, if you sacrifice too much. So you've got to find that balance, right, Phil, of don't sacrifice your retirement to help your kids, because you're not doing either one of you really a benefit.
Oh, absolutely not. Because I mean, it's a pro and a con, and a lot of it comes down to preference. I get it. I work with a lot of clients.
I do too.
Hey, my parents helped me out. I got out of college with no college debt, and I want to give my kids that kind of head up.
But it's a different world right now too.
I mean, it's a much different world. I mean, college costs today are astronomical.
Right. 40 times what it might have been, 30 years ago.
Right. So it's not wrong to do it, but just understand, go into it eyes wide open, right? That might be an aspiration that, yes, you'd love to pay for them, all their college debt. So they had no debt when they come out of college, and they could start with.
That's the retirement goal.
That's awesome.
But the money doesn't justify it. Then you can't do it. So then
run the math out to see, okay, if I do that, this is what that looks like. I'm spending 20, 30, 40 a year for the next 4, 5 years, because most kids don't graduate in 4 years now. It's at least 5. So what does that look like? And where does that then leave you from a retirement standpoint? If you're okay saying, well, if I do that, well, I might not be able to retire until I'm 70, or 75, because I've got to work those extra years to kind of catch up,
Yeah.
Again, it's going in.
Make that informed decision. Make the informed decision, not just, I'm just going to, especially like because it's easy. The kids are like, hey, mom, dad, can you give me a hand? We all go, sure, no problem,
Yep.
blah, blah, blah. But at some point you have to really watch those purse strings because they can get out of control, especially right now when things are so out of control.
Right. And I mean, your kid's the best, and everyone's approach is different. But I mean, personally, our approach has been we paid for a lot of it, but we wanted to make sure that our kids had some skin in the game, so to speak, right?
Yep. Yep.
I mean, because that way they took it a little bit more serious, maybe, and if there was a way to get it done in 4 years versus 5, well, knowing that, hey, if I, have this amount of debt when I come out versus this, I mean, this is some reality. So it starts to bring them into adulthood and the reality of, the cost of the decisions and that early on. So, I mean, there's really nothing wrong with that. I understand. Yeah, you want to.
No, for sure.
But
I mean, we did this. Yeah, we did the same thing. Like she took it upon herself. She's like, hey, I can go to this early college. I can go to this high school. She didn't go to the high school with her friends. She switched and applied, went to a different high school where when she graduated, she had a 2 years associate's degree.
Yeah.
So that when she went to college, she only had to do 2 more years to get her full 4 years. And so instead of having to spend for 4 years
only 2.
at the major university, she only had to spend for 2. And that was her choice. That was her decision with a little bit of research, and it was like, great, So that was already a proactive step to save us money. And then we helped her and so on and so forth. So again, balance.
It's all about
right?
balance and informed decisions, right? No going in what this looks
exactly.
like and then make a decision based on that. So,
okay. Number 4, I want to retire early. I did retire early, and now I'm going broke fast.
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
So longevity risk. Okay. We've talked about it a ton of times. It's the great risk multiplier to stock market risk and taxation risk and all these other risks, right? Well, if you retire early, it's almost like longevity risk on steroids because you're adding more, and years to it and spending sooner.
I mean, the longevity is something you don't have a lot of control of, I mean, it's family history, whatever it is, but this you do, right? So, I mean, if you retire at 55 versus 65 or 70 or whatever the number is, I mean, that's 10 years early. And those are a lot of times in the more peak earning years. So you're cutting those out.
Yeah.
Not to say it can't be done.
And key metrics.
Absolutely can be done.
No. But key metrics to think about is that's one, right? Your peak earning years, but also like the Medicare or the medical side of things.
Medical is probably one of the biggest pieces of it, because if you're retiring pre-65, and this is a discussion we have with clients all the time, now healthcare is on you, and you're in the marketplace, probably, buying it on your own. So for a married couple today, not uncommon to pay $1,500 to $2,000 a month for a higher deductible plan. I mean, then the first $5,000 to $7,000 is probably out of your pocket anyways. Versus if you're at 65, well, now it's Medicare, and that's a much different structure, much more affordable. So
you're riding your savings horse right now versus tapping into Social Security, especially if you've gone before 62, because you can't turn it on yet, right? And then if you do need the money, because all right, well, now we've got to turn it on at 62 because we've been tapping into our own stuff for a while.
Right.
Well, now you've got that haircut as well.
Yep. Yeah. So again, with all of it, it's running the math to see, does it work? What does this long-term picture look like? And if I retire a year, 2, 3 years early, can I make it work?
And if it does,
cool. Great. And
right.
I've had clients that, I mean, that was their goal. They're just done that, let's see what we can do to make this work. Okay, here's what we have to do. Your planned lifestyle budget was X. We've got to trim that back a little bit, So as long as you run the math and stay on course with it, it can work. The bigger risk with it too, as you're walking down this, is that's a much longer period of time. So you have to really monitor what is going on along the way and be very careful in those early years, because, okay, you're younger, probably more active. You want to spend more. It's easier to do that. But spending more in those earlier years is very, very detrimental long term. So
and sequence of return risk is probably going to play into this. So, I mean, we want to be able to retire in any economy, but you may want to take that into account as well, right? Because if you're tapping into that while markets are down, that's not helping.
Have a plan. Make sure that, if that's your goal, does it work? Don't just jump into it and don't go to your advisor and say, hey, I did a thing. I decided my boss ticked me off last week and I put my 2-week notice in. Is this going to work? Let's go.
Well, for this one, for this one, right? For this one, the how to avoid it is you definitely got to have a strategy and a plan.
Right.
And if you're thinking, if this is on your radar and you're a few years away from it, then you may want to get real aggressive about savings between now and then, right? But definitely sit down with a professional and get a strategy in place and say, okay, here's the target goal. How close are we to making this work? And that honestly works for any retirement conversation, whether you're planning on retiring at normal retirement age of 65 or 67 or 70 or 55, right? It doesn't matter the age. Talk to an advisor and go, here's my goal. Here's my dream. Can we make it happen? And if so, how?
And I mean, if that is your dream, to the point a couple of topics ago, you're, in those peak earning years, be planned to save a lot of your money to get to this goal. If you did,
don't let the lifestyle creep.
Don't
that.
Let the lifestyle creep, spend it all, and then 2 years later say, "Hey, this is great. I'm going to retire early now," because probably not going to work unless you've saved heavily to get there. So.
Yeah, true. Good point. All right. Final one is, money mistake for people over the last number of years has been, man, I really should have looked at some other tax bucket strategies. I did the thing I was taught to do. I've been dumping into the 401k for 30 years and that's all I got, right? Or that's all I got from a tax standpoint anyway. So we've been seeing that the last number of years, Phil. People are like, other tax strategies might have been a good idea.
I mean, I've talked with clients about Roth conversions and just Roth tax-free in general for years. I mean, it's always been a part of our process with my background as a CPA and that master's in tax.
Right.
Tax
Makes sense.
focus has always been there.
But most of
us
don't get that conversation. Right.
And I love the fact that it's starting to come to light that, hey, there is some opportunity. Make sure you understand how this works, have some balance in those buckets. For sure, you're at where you're at. There's nothing you can do to change that. So don't get down on yourself at this point. If you have everything in tax deferred,
right,
it's you and 95% of the rest of the workforce out there. It's just, to your point, what we've been trained to do. Understand where you're at now. How do we correct it and get a better balance in play? My concern with the Roth, where we're at today, is that it's starting to get so much light and media attention that I think people are almost going the other direction now, where they're like, oh, Roth, this is great. Let's get everything moved to the Roth. I want to, I don't want to have any tax deferred money. And that might be the wrong answer too, right? It comes back to balance. Understand Roth is good, but like every good thing, there's got to be a balance. And you can actually have too much of it where you paid way too much tax up front, getting everything into Roth that now it didn't really make sense long term.
Yeah, you bumped your bracket trying to convert it and don't forget, folks, that if you convert the money over, you can't touch it for 5 years.
You can't touch.
So
you can't
make
touch
sure
the
it's
growth.
not money.
I mean, you can always get to the principal.
The growth.
That's always the advantage in doing Roth, either contribution or conversions, is that principal's liquid. But it's still, it's typically that later type money in the Roth. So it's not something you want to plan on using early.
Right. It's something which is fine as long as you plan for that, right? Just okay, let's do the conversion or whatever, but we don't need it for a while, which is good, and that you haven't kicked yourself up a tax bracket, because that's the biggie. If you got $1 million in your 401k and you're like, Roth is the answer. This is what we're gonna do. Let's convert it all, even if you can pay the taxes on it. Do you really want to? Because it's going to be a higher tax bracket.
Did that really make sense long term?
You want a strategy. Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times I talk with advisors, Phil, and they say, yeah, maybe it's a 3, 5, or 6, whatever year conversion strategy, where that way you're keeping yourself, you're a little at a time so that you're not jacking stuff up.
Generally, and again, depending on your scenario, you're not going to want everything converted to a Roth, because making it simple, even if you had just Social Security and IRA money, tax deferred money, well, if you have everything moved over, then there's no taxable income at all. And we all have a standard deduction, right? So we can all have quote unquote income, up to, for a married couple, 25, 27,000, depending on age, of deductible or deductions to offset income, right? So you can always have money in that tax deferred account that's generating what would be generally taxable income, but then it gets offset by a standard deduction and you're still not paying tax. So a good reason not to have it all converted. Have a balance, have a plan. What does this look like for you specifically long term?
And what it should look like is, like we said before, if you want to avoid some of these money mistakes so that you're not stepping into stuff that others have already done, well, go work with a financial professional who does it day in and day out, because they've seen the money mistakes. and they have, options and things and ways to look at seeing what you need to do for your unique situation and change that up. So that's the whole purpose of getting onto the calendar and having a conversation with a financial professional in your area. And of course, Phil's a CPA and a personal financial specialist, so he's looking at both sides of offense and defense, if you will. So get yourself onto the calendar. You can stop by philstaxhacks.com. It's philstaxhacks.com. Call him at 248-888-7530 as well if you'd like to get started right away and have a chat. 248-888-7530. It's on the screen for those watching in video form. And of course, you just heard me say it in audio form. Or just stop by the website, philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us on all the major platforms as well as YouTube for the video side. Phil, thanks for hanging out, my friend. Always appreciate it. You have yourself a good week. Catch you later. Trick or treat. Have yourself a great week. We'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Phil?
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.